This video is looking at the cost management process. So we're looking at the process involved in going from on bringing the project in on time, on budget. So the cost management process, so the aim of it, as I said, is to um, make sure that the project is brought in on budget. The first thing you need to do is estimate that budget. So you get to set the rules, you get to set the budget, and then you're going to make sure once you've set the budget that you bring it in on time. So the processes in cost management is firstly to determine the cost to complete the project, and that is making up the budget, saying this is what we're going to do it for, and then monitor the project's cost during execution to make sure you are going to bring it in on budget, and manage any changes. So changes will happen in a project, and you need to manage those because those changes can affect your budget. So it may be that things have been added to the project and you've got to get extra budget. So that budget is not cast in stone. As the project proceeds, the budget may change. It may increase as works are added or decrease as works are removed. So that's what you do. So for a successful contractor, you need to have a good cost estimate. You've got to estimate how much it's going to cost you to do the works accurately, because if you don't, with the best will in the world, if you've got a budget that's too low, you're not going to be able to bring it in on budget. So likewise, if it's too high, you may not win the contract. So you've got to get that budget bang on accurate. So there's got to be an accurate cost estimate and production of a budget. And then once you have got the project underway, you've got to control those costs to make sure that you are producing that project output for the amount that you said you would. So cost estimate plus cost control means that you're going to make a profit and you're going to be a successful contractor. So let's just look at that in the context of our project management model. So hopefully this is familiar to you, the initiating, planning, executing, closing and monitoring and controlling processes. That planning part of it happens obviously during the planning part, where you're estimating the costs and the rates and you're developing the budget. You're saying this is how much we think we're going to do it for, and then when the project starts, you need to implement the work, which means you need to communicate those budgets to the people doing the work. You need to break it down into work packages so that you can make people responsible for their little parts of the budget. And then there's the monitoring and controlling, which is the important part of costs. As the project is proceeding, you are checking those actual costs against what you budgeted and saying, are we bringing this in on budget or are we not? And that's why we break our budget down into small parts. So you're not looking at the whole project in one go, you're looking at each one of those little line items. So you're looking at cut to fill, you're looking at stripping topsoil, you're looking at sealing the road. You're looking at each one of those individually and you're saying, is this one being brought in for the part of the budget that it was allowed for? So you're monitoring those costs. You're identifying variations. It may be that work's been added and that has incurred extra costs. So you're looking for that, and with a variation, when the client adds work, you're allowed to go along and say, look, you've added extra width to the road or something like that. We want to be paid more for it because the contract agreement's changed. And so you're allowed to claim for that. So you need to identify those variations. If you don't identify them, you can't claim them. And you need to manage those changes. So once you've identified a variation that something's changed, you need to get permission from the client to do the extra expenditure. You need to add it to your budget. You also need to identify where something's starting to blow out. So you might look at the cut to fill and you think, well, we should have completed it by now for $10,000. It's cost us $15,000 and we're still not finished. Something's wrong. So you need to identify that there's a cost blowout happening, and you need to go along and you need to sort it out. You need to try to minimize the damage. So that's what that monitoring and controlling is all about. It's no use identifying that you've blown the budget when the project's finished. You can't do anything about it. So the idea of the monitoring and controlling processes is that you're identifying problems really early on, as soon as possible. You're investigating them and finding out how you can minimize the damage, how you can try to control those costs. And obviously at the end of it all, you've got a lot of information, a lot of experience about how much things cost. You know more about how much it costs to do that particular type of job when you finished it. So you know, well, it cost us, we thought it was going to cost us $10 per square meter to lay, to trim the subgrade. It cost us $12, so you know a little bit more. So you need to feed those lessons back in for future estimates. So the next time you do a project of that type, you've got that experience there, you're feeding that in, and the next time you do an estimate, you're going to be just that little bit better. So looking at how the planning part of it works, hopefully this green bit here is familiar to you as the time management planning. So you recall that we had the work breakdown structure there. We need to estimate resources, so what are the resources going to do the job, the durations, how long it's going to take those resources to do each particular work package. You're also looking at each one of those work packages and saying what order they need to go in, and then you're producing your program. Remember, that was that Gantt chart, and so that's what all of that time management is all about. From that comes the cost management planning. So from the estimate resources, you know what the resource requirements are, and that comes down to the estimate cost. So you know, okay, I need an excavator. An excavator is going to cost $200 an hour. I need some labor, 4 men. These guys are going to cost $25 an hour, whatever. Okay, and the duration. So I know that I need my excavator is going to cost me $200 an hour. If I multiply that by the duration, it's going to cost me $200 an hour, and I need it for 8 hours. It's going to cost me 200 times 8 is going to cost what, $1,600. So once you've got what you require and you know what the rates are and how long you need it for, you can estimate the costs for those particular work packages, and those are the cost estimates. And then you need to determine the budget, and there's a little bit more that goes into determine the budget, and then what comes out there is the budget. When you combine the budget with the program, you are able to produce the cash flow. And remember, the cash flow diagram shows the budget expenditure over time, when you're actually going to spend and how much you're going to spend in that particular point in time. Just looking at that, determining the budget, remember we talked about you had the resource requirements, the things that we need to do and how long we need them for. We can estimate the costs of the plant, the labor. We can go and estimate how much the materials are. We go to the suppliers and ask them to give us a quote, same with subcontractors. And so we've got the cost estimate of the direct costs. But we've got to add in indirect costs as well. So we've got our overheads. Remember, that is the office staff that are processing timesheets, that is the site supervisor, that is the site hut, the access road, all those things that are required to do the job but aren't directly related to its actual production. So that's what overheads are. And there's also risk. These are cost estimates if everything goes right. So we're saying we need an excavator for 8 hours to do this job, but if it rains, we might need it there for 10 hours because it might be stopped for a couple of hours while it rains. So those are the sort of risks you have to sort of factor into it. So you might say, okay, well, we've estimated $2,000 for this, but there's a risk that it's going to rain and that part of the project's going to be delayed a little bit. It's going to cost us a little bit more, so let's put in $200 on top. So instead of saying $2,000, we're going to say $2,200 to cover the potential risk. And we've also got profit as well. Profit is oftentimes included, profit and overheads are sometimes included in the rates for excavators and labour and stuff. So your plant and labour costs, you normally factor those into those rates that you use. With materials, you normally add 10 to 15% on top. So sometimes those are already factored into those cost estimates. So once you've determined the budget and you made sure you've got suitable allowance for risk, overheads and profit, you've got your budget, and then from the budget within the program give you the cash flow. So that's the planning side of things. This is what happens before you start working on the project. You plan it, you figure out how much money you need, when you need it, and all that sort of stuff. The next part of it is when the project actually starts. When you're starting to do the work, you need to control the cost. So that comes down to that control and monitoring that we're talking about. So monitoring is looking at something and saying, is this right? Control is if something's not right, you take control of it. So it's like driving a car. You normally what you're doing is you're just watching the road, you're holding the steering wheel. If a corner comes up, you'll turn the steering wheel. So you're monitoring, you're watching the road, there's a corner coming up, I'm going to turn the steering wheel to respond. So that's monitoring and control. Actual costs are collected and analysed. So you've got the budgeted cost, which is just an estimate. It is your best guess before the project's even started of how much it's going to cost. Now you're actually doing the work, you're getting actual costs, and you're saying how do those actual costs, what we're actually spending, compare to what we thought we'd be spending. And if it's less, that's great, we're making a profit. If it's more, then we've got a problem. Cost overruns identified as they occur. So that's why we break it down into little bits. It may be that 4 out of 5 of your work packages is working really well and you don't have to pay much attention to them. It may be that one work package, say the cut to fill, is starting to blow out. You're saying, well, we're halfway complete, we should have spent this much money, we've spent much more, what's going wrong? And you go and investigate, and it might be that the digger's too small, or someone's being lazy, or the ground is harder than what you thought. You find out what the problem is and you do something about it. So you're minimizing that cost overrun. Actual productivity measured and compared with estimates. So you thought that you were going to be laying 100 meters of road. If you're only laying 80 meters of road, that's a problem. You've got to find out why. If you're laying 120 meters of road, well, that's great. You still want to find out why, because you want to do it again. Revenue monitored to make sure that it's all been gathered. So most engineering projects are delivered by contracts, and you need to make sure that everything that you are entitled to, you're actually claiming. Possible variations, so if the client's changed something, then you need to identify that and claim it. And then every month or so, you forecast what the final cost is going to be. So we thought it was going to be $1.2 million. It's probably going to be $1.1 million or $1.25 million, whatever. So you always want to keep an eye on that forecast so that the client and your boss know where the project's heading. So one of the most important things with the cost control is to measure those costs on a daily basis. It's no use at the end of the project looking at it and saying we made a loss. That's no good. You need to have real-time information about how that project is going. You can't control something that you do not measure. If you don't know that something's blowing out cost-wise, then you can't do anything about it. So what we've got is cost collection and analysis. And basically it's cost capture, so you're capturing the costs, you're accumulating them, bringing them all together, and you're reporting on them. So we'll just look at that in a bit more detail. So when you're on site, most companies have what's an order book or an order system. So the guy on site, if he needs to get a subcontractor to do some work, he'll hire the guy, he'll write out an order for him, which is basically just please do this work. It'll have a distinct number, he'll actually give it a cost code, and then he'll put it into a system. And say with materials too, so you might find that the boss sends you down the road to buy some bolts or something like that, and he'll give you an order number and you'll give it to the supplier, and the supplier will tell you how much it is, and that order gets entered into the system. So materials and subcontractors, there are orders which are entered into the system. Likewise, timesheets. Every day the plant operators and the labor people, they all write down what did I do this day. So I worked on the cut to fill for the morning for 4 hours, and then I was working on the drainage work for another 4 hours. So they allocate their time according to the work package, and that's there both the plant and the labor. So all that information there, so you've got the times from the plant and labor, multiply it by the rates and you get how much the plant and labor cost. The orders, how much those things cost, they get entered into a costing system, usually every day or every week. Now the costing system is just a big computer system, and what it does is it takes all of those orders and those timesheets, and there may be hundreds of them, and puts them into the right boxes. So it says cut to fill has had this much time spent on it, has had this many orders placed. So it takes all of those things and puts them into the right boxes, so to speak. And then what comes out of that is a cost report, which tells you for each work package how much you've been budgeted for, how much it's actually cost, And so you can look at those, compare what was budgeted and what was cost, and you can determine which of those work packages are doing well, making a profit, and which ones are doing badly. So cost accounts and cost codes. So a cost account is like a work package. So far I've been talking about work packages as the cost account. So I think of it as a whole lot of little shoeboxes. So when you've got a project, you split it into little bits, and each little bit's got a certain amount of money allocated to it. Each one is treated like its own little business, its own little shoebox. So the budgeted items, so a cost account is a budget item where costs are accumulated and compared. So it can be arranged by work type. So a lot of companies do it by the type of work. So carpentry, if you were in our class, you would have looked at a cost report which split it down by work items, and their number for carpentry was 701, formwork was 602, and so on. So they're splitting it by the trades, the type of work. Or you can split it by work package, and that's what most projects do. They take it by the work package. So topsoil removal, for example, would include a whole lot of work types. It would include stuff like excavator operation, it would include excavator operation, topsoiling, and that sort of stuff. Another work package might be concreting, which would include carpentry and formwork and concreting all in one work package. And so the cost accounts can be either or, and companies use both of those. A cost code is a unique number allocated to each cost account. So the guys in the field, when they are writing their timesheets, they need to have a number to do it. What they don't want to do is write, I was working on the cut to fill operation for 4 hours. What they want to do is item 2.2, 4 hours. So it's a unique number to allow people to allocate their costs to the appropriate cost account when they're doing their timesheets and when they're doing the orders. It allows the cost to be allocated to the correct cost account, because once you've sort of got a number and the time or the amount sort of allocated to it, the computer system can arrange everything according to those cost codes, and it groups them all together, adds them all up, and then tells you the actual costs that have been charged to that particular cost code. So it usually has a job number as part of the code. So oftentimes you've got a company which is working on a whole lot of projects, and each project will have its own code as well. So for example, you might be working on project 210 and you might be working on carpentry. So the carpentry work you do would be 210.701. So the 210 is the project, and the 710 is the type of work, that particular work that you're doing. And once again, so the person back at the office can type that in, and that is allocated to that particular cost account, which is the carpentry on that particular project, not the carpentry on another project, the carpentry on your project. So the costing system, that computer system, uses the cost codes to allocate costs to the cost accounts. So the cost reports, these are what come out of the costing system. They set out the costs, they compare actual costs to budgeted costs, and once you compare the actual to the budgeted, you can identify the discrepancies, and you can predict the final costs from that as well. So here's an example of a cost report from the previous video. So here was our budget, so there's our budget there, and now we're doing the work. For the establishment, we've completed 100%. We budgeted for $2,700 once 100% was complete. It's cost us $2,600, so we are $100 up. We said it would cost $2,700, only cost us $2,600. We've saved ourselves $100. The bonds and insurances, we're only 40% of the way through, so this was a cost report at the end of week 2. You'll be doing these cost reports every week, so every week these cost reports will be coming out, and you'll be able to identify problems as they occur. So the bonds and insurances, 40% complete. We budgeted 1,400 and it's cost that much, so no gain, no loss. It's sort of working out okay. Topsoil removal, 100% complete, and looks like we made a bit of a loss on that. So we said it would budget, we'd do it for 22,600, it's cost us $24,000. We've made a $1,400 loss, and there's nothing we can do about that. That one's completed. But these ones here, the ones that are partially complete, we can do something about. So the subgrade preparation, we budgeted $13,000 at 20% complete, so you can see 20% of that is about $13,000. We've only spent $11,000, so we're $2,000 up. So just looking at this one here, we're saying, yeah, that's no problem. Now, if that was making a loss, what I'd be doing is I'd be going out and I'd be investigating that and saying, why is it making a loss? What can I do to try to minimize that loss? What can I do about it? Because it's only when something's underway that you can actually do something about it. So in this video, we've sort of looked at the important things of managing costs. You need to have an accurate budget that reflects what you're going to do, and then you need to do the works as you've planned to do in the budget. And the only way to do that is to regularly check, monitor and control that budget as the project goes through. No use looking at it at the end and finding out you made a loss.